So let me remind us today that what we are talking about as the central focus of our conversations is some idea of what the fundamental need for therapy for dealing with those issues in life is really all about and where that originates. And I've been referring to the fact that we as evolutionary creatures look for a kind of instruction about what kind of creatures we should be. If you remember, I made the comparison to the elephants in South Africa. I do that because we're all very sympathetic, most of us, to elephants. We can see how intelligent and how complex creatures they are. And we know from the experience that it takes them 14 years to become elephants. And my suggestion is that we are more complicated, more dimensioned, if you want to put it that way, and that therefore we probably take slightly longer to become ourselves. The point is that every single minute of every single hour in the first years of our lives, we are in fact gathering information and learning how to be ourselves. That's the basic thesis here. So that when I refer to learning, if you remember, I don't mean just intellectual learning, I mean all the ways in which we humans learn. By what we see, by what we hear, by what we experience, by what we intuit, by what we define and think about. All of that interacts to produce a kind of education about ourselves in us. Now, what I want to do is continue to look at that body of information from the various perspectives that will allow us to understand how it becomes problematic in our lives. Now, one of the most important things about this learning, this education that I'm talking about, is that it is crowded with every detail that we experience in all the years of our lives. So the way I like to say it is there's so much that we remember, that we keep in ourselves the experience of every single thing that is done or not done with us, so much so that we could not possibly recall it all. Now what that points to is the fact that this body of information that I am referring to starts off with a very important characteristic. It is unconscious. It is out of sight. We do not know that it is there. Now, my clients and the people I usually deal with know that I have a kind of facetious way of referring to that. I always say that 99.5% of people, conservatively estimated, have no idea that this body of knowledge exists in us. In other words, what it means is that all of us are walking around with this body of information that is unconscious in us. And so, first and foremost, I am referring to a whole mass of material that would ordinarily be ignored, denied, not seen. But the thing about that being out of sight is that it can be pointed to in certain experiences. One way that I found at least makes some allusion to it is if you ask yourself what the job, what the role of a director is in putting together a play or a film. After all, the actors who are in these productions are professionals. They show up knowing their lines. If they show up knowing their lines as they do, what is the point of a director? What do you need a director for? And of course, any actor will tell you immediately that the role of the director and what the director does is crucially important for the ultimate outcome of the play or the film or whatever production they're working on. And what the role of the director is points to this body of information that I am alluding to here. In other words, one way of saying it fairly simply is that the director helps the actors, male or female, in question. It doesn't matter whether the director's male or female, the actor's male or female. The point is he helps them understand, see, feel, enter, experience what the quest, what the want, what the desire, what the aim or goal of the actor is in saying this line, in taking that action, and so on. If a director is good and does his job effectively, then there's a kind of consistent vision that the actor will be able to enact throughout the course of the production to bring to a final conclusion the experience of the audience. In other words, there is out of sight, below the surface of the lines, an activity, a dimension, a direction in the activities, in the statements, in the lines that are being delivered, that is in fact enacting itself. Now, one way of my saying this is that nothing is ever said or done, or not said or not done, by us human beings without a want or wants, without a direction or goal being present in it. In short, it is absolutely impossible for us humans to act in a way that doesn't have a want or desire in it. It could be the simplest of statements, and it seemed to be the least liable to the kind of analysis that I'm giving to it. But for example, I happen to live in a building that has a doorman, and I walk past the doorman every day, coming in, going out, and I'll say, "Hello, Bill. Hello, Joe. Hi." And nothing could be simpler than that statement. Nothing could be quicker. It takes seconds for me to do it. But the want beneath it all is to acknowledge each other, to say that I see him. I'm not treating him as like he's an automaton or not a human being. I'm recognizing his existence, and he's recognizing mine as we pass each other. So that there's a want of the deepest kind, in fact, present in a 15-second statement that gets done almost automatically every day. And if it's true in that instance, obviously, where is it not true? So that the most important dimension of this problem that we're thinking about is the fact that if an individual is experiencing difficulty, if he feels or she feels that they need therapy or whatever, it's the product of this body of knowledge acting in ways, influencing the individual in ways which he or she does not find productive, does not find effective. There's problematic experience in it. Now, the problem here is that if this body of learning is not realized, and that's a very important verb here, then both the therapist and the individual who's going to therapy can get caught up in a kind of artificial sort of drama that wants to help, is well-intentioned, wants to aim at doing something for the person involved, but does not know how to do so. I had a dramatic experience of that personally recently. A client of mine to whom I had not spoken for about 10 years. After about 5 or 6 years of our working together, he stopped treatment, and that's fine. After 10 years, he came back into my experience, quite on his initiative, quite because he wanted to do so. And the first thing he said to me as we sat down together to begin our new conversations was, "I realize I don't want to imitate anything." Now, that told me the whole story. I got it right away. Because what he's telling me is that in the time he took off, it took him a long time, he realized that it was he himself and his body of learning about himself that was the issue. And if he's imitating anything, it can be well-intentioned. He's essentially being prescribed some formula, and you see that frequently enough. There are all kinds of workshops that say, this is the cure. There are all kinds of self-help books. I remember asking a therapist friend of mine once, how come those self-help books sound the way they do? And she said a wonderful thing. She said, the writers don't believe what they say. I said, wow, that's really a statement. But that's, how many of those books do you read and they have no effect? How many of those prescriptions does one follow and they have no effect? The same old continues on. The point is, you see, that if I am simply adapting some kind of cure, I'm simply doing something that's prescribed to me as the right way to do things, it's essentially another external imposition upon me that has nothing to do with my sense of myself or what I have learned about myself. So that the fundamental problem continues to reassert itself either in feeling or in action, depends how it's expressing itself. And I do not come to an awareness that something in me is at stake here and is determining how I'm going to operate. So the first point to associate with this body of instruction about ourselves that I'm talking about is that in most cases, we do not even know it's there. We are not aware of it. And therefore, we do not bring it into play when we're discussing or trying to work on anything that is problematic in our lives. And it seems impossible to say anything that's so dramatic and have it be true. What? Are you telling me that the story that determines everything about how I act and think about myself is acting in me and out of sight? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Now, it's possible to see many ways in which that has an effect upon us individually that is unconscious, and that's what we'll talk about next time.